Hello, this is Wisdom Hunter with another video for solo D&D RPG on Roll20. So when you don't have anybody else to play with and you gotta play by yourself, go to Roll20. It's really fun. There's a lot of things you can do on Roll20, and Roll20 really helps you move fast in your story when you're playing solo games. This series of videos that I'm doing is putting together tricks that you can use, macros that you can use to actually make your gameplay a lot more fun. So this particular video is going to be about exhaustion rolls. Now let's talk about exhaustion for a second, because most DMs don't really use it that much, and it's something that gets forgotten. But I'll tell you one thing, you really have to pay attention to the exhaustion level of your players, because this really creates that challenging aspect of an adventure. When a PC starts building up exhaustion levels, you really get that feeling like they're adventuring. They're going through some hard times. They're putting out the effort. They're testing their limits. And so it's really fun to actually play with levels of exhaustion. Because when you bring down that power of the player, you really increase that challenge of the game. And it feels so much more satisfying when the PCs are actually playing with levels of exhaustion. Because it really shows that effort, that power that they put into playing and adventuring. So usually in a game, the DM will say, okay, roll for exhaustion or take a couple of levels of exhaustion. But when you are playing all by yourself, you have to kind of keep in mind that you have to test the exhaustion level of the player. So I'm going to be showing you in this video some macros that you can do to instantly and quickly test the exhaustion level of your PCs. So let's get into it. Okay, so here you see two basic macros that I use. On the right is the basic endurance check. So I actually create a skill in those list of skills for the character sheet, an entry for endurance, and I base it on the Constitution. Now the PCs can actually take proficiency in endurance, and that proficiency in endurance shows the struggles, the trainings that they put together to actually condition their bodies for endurance. So the PC can actually do an endurance check. Now that endurance check is compared against levels of conditions that test the players. So I've got many levels of condition, from calm to light to medium to heavy to extreme. So then the player will actually roll endurance against various DCs and to avoid levels of exhaustion. So you're going to see how this works. That you'll see here over to the left for the exhaustion DC for heavy conditions, you'll see that to avoid one level of exhaustion, there's a DC, which is the JDC plus 3. Or to avoid 2 levels of exhaustion, it's the JDC itself. You have to beat that. Or to avoid 3 levels of exhaustion, just beat the JDC minus 3. So you get these different thresholds of DCs, and for each threshold that's beaten, you reduce how much exhaustion you're going to take. If you beat all of the DCs, you receive no exhaustion. So now let's go to Roll20, and I'll show you how this plays out. Okay, so here we are in Roll20, and I've brought out the macros that I use for this. On the left, you're going to see the endurance macro. And then over here to the right, I'm going to be showing you the different exhaustion macros. And when you see these levels, like over here, you'll see heavy, calm, extreme, light, and medium. That refers to like the weather, the level of adventuring. A lot of this is a judgment call. So if you feel like the conditions are kind of medium tough, okay, go ahead and bring out the exhaustion DC for medium conditions, right? Or if you think it's very calm, the weather's very nice, and it's not a very hard trail to walk on, and you're not pushing it, the weather is nice, you got some food and water, you can rest a little bit. Those are nice calm conditions for traveling. Okay, and you can do a calm conditions to test your endurance and to test if you're going to get any exhaustion from that. And of course, for a calm condition, the DC is going to be a little lower. So let's go ahead and show you how this all works. Okay, so first we're going to go ahead and do the endurance check. So the endurance check turned out to be 17. Very nice check. Now I'll go ahead and just run through the different macros for the different levels of conditions. Each time I do that, you're going to be able to see the macro. You can pause the video, write down the macro, adjust it any way you want to, but you're also going to see the DCs that result from those macros. And this endurance check of 17 just has to beat those. So first it's going to say, what is the JDC? We're going to say 15. Okay, so for these calm conditions, to avoid 1 level of exhaustion, you just have to beat a DC 9. So of course, in a calm condition, the DC is going to be very low, but you still have to beat it to avoid 1 level of exhaustion. Okay, now we're going on to light conditions. This is a little tough, starting to test you a little bit more. You can actually see the macro. Okay, let's go ahead and test it. So once again, it's going to ask you for that JDC. We'll keep the JDC, the journey DC the same for each one so you can compare them better. So now exhaustion for light conditions. you've got your endurance check. You've got to do an endurance check, which has already been 17. To avoid 1 level of exhaustion, you've got to beat a DC 12. So you can see for light conditions, just to avoid 1 level, the DC is a little higher, but still somewhat easy. Okay, now we'll go on to the next condition, which is medium conditions. Test it. What is the JDC? We'll continue on with 15. Now, to avoid 1 level of exhaustion, you need to beat a DC 15. To avoid 2 levels of exhaustion, you need to beat a DC 12. So you can see the DCs are starting to creep up here, where it's actually possible to get 2 levels of exhaustion. Now we go to the heavy conditions. Let's go ahead, you can see the macro here. Let's go ahead and test it. Keep the JDC the same. Now you can see, to avoid exhaustion for these heavy conditions, to avoid 1 level of exhaustion, you need a DC 18. Now we can see that our particular PC in this instance rolled a 17 for the endurance check. So our particular PC would actually get 1 level of exhaustion from these heavy conditions. But to avoid 2 levels, had to beat a DC 15, which the PC did, so the PC avoided 2 levels of exhaustion. And in order to avoid 3 levels of exhaustion, just had to get a 12 or better on the endurance check. So you can see that this endurance check with these exhaustion levels is a quick and easy way for you to quickly measure how the PC has been adventuring in the past 4 to 8 hours. And then you decide in your mind, what are those conditions? Are they calm, light, medium, heavy, or extreme? And then you decide which that is, roll an endurance check, and then pick out the conditions, and then test your endurance check against those DCs and see if you get any exhaustion. It's as easy as that. It really makes the game interesting when you give your PCs levels of exhaustion. So now we'll go on to the last one. This is extreme. These are extreme weather conditions, extreme traveling conditions, extreme terrain, extreme challenges, tough. Here's what the macro is going to look like. We'll test the macro. Same thing, JDC 15. So there, you can see to avoid 1 level of exhaustion, you have to beat a DC of 21. So usually in an extreme condition, if you're doing anything physical, is a very high DC, and you're probably going to end up with at least 1 level of exhaustion, unless you can beat that really high DC. And you got it to avoid 2 levels of exhaustion, you got to beat a DC 18. To avoid 3 levels of exhaustion, you got to beat a DC 15. So in this particular case, our PC rolled a 17. So our PC avoided 3 levels and 4 levels, but the PC is going to pick up 2 levels of exhaustion in these extreme conditions because the PC did not beat that DC of 18. Okay, so I've shown you the macros, I've shown you how this all works, and now the only thing left to show you is what exhaustion looks like for the PCs in the way I play the game. Alright, so here we are in a character sheet. I'm going to take you down and let you show Exhaustion 1 is going to have a -1 to ability checks and a saving throws. So that's what Exhaustion 1 looks like in my game. Exhaustion 2 is going to be -1 for attack rolls. That includes all attacks, spell attacks, melee attacks, ranged attacks, and a -1 to the AC. And so you'll see that as you go down to Exhaustion level 3 again, it'll be -1 for ability checks and -1 for saving throws. And then as you go down to Exhaustion 4, it's going to go back to reducing attacks and AC by 1. So the way it works in my shaped sheet here in Roll20 is if my PC has Exhaustion level 4, I will check off all of the boxes for Exhaustion 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that will sum up the negative modifiers from each level of exhaustion. So now if my PC does a long rest and actually reduces exhaustion by 2 levels, I'll come in and just click off 2 levels, and now my PC is down to 2 levels of exhaustion. So I just step it up 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 levels, 5, all the way to Exhaustion level 8. So finally at Exhaustion level 8, the PC has -4 for all attacks, -4 for AC, -4 for all skill checks, and -4 for all saving throws. So that's how I run Exhaustion, but reducing saving throws, reducing skill checks, reducing attacks, reducing AC is all part of Exhaustion and making it really challenging for my PCs to actually continue to play. And I really suggest you work this into your game and really find a way to incorporate Exhaustion like I did, something like I did, into your games too. So this is Wisdom Hunter, and this has been a video on Exhaustion rolls. So remember, whoever enjoys the game the most wins.